Okay, everyone, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, August 13th, 2026. This is the Assembly Rules Committee, at least titled that for now. We are noticed from 1 to 3 p.m. I do anticipate we have a lot of things on the agenda, so we are likely to use those 2 hours, but obviously, if folks need to be on the phone, please feel free to switch over. And then I'll also note we were having trouble with our phone system. I can't guarantee that won't happen again, but right now we do have a phone. I see Member Silver's on the phone. So if the phone line goes down, apologies in advance, and it is either ACS or GCI's fault, but as far as we can tell. Okay, so let's go around the room and we'll do introductions and we'll get into our business. George.
George Martinez. George.
Janice Park.
Donald Handelin.
Jared Gerker.
Zach Johnson.
Sydney Scout.
Anna Brawley.
Aaron Baldwin Day.
And on the phone, Yarrow Silvers. Okay, we will double check. Yeah, just a reminder, folks in the room, please make sure your mic is off if you are not speaking, and we'll see what we can do about the echo. I'll move my microphone a little bit further away from the giant one on the middle table. Any other members on the phone? Okay, I'll keep an eye out for that. As usual, just text me if you want to be in the queue. So we'll move through our business. We're also joined by, Assembly Council, clerk staff, members of the public, Ombudsman's office, Mayor's office, and legislative services. So we have a full agenda. We'll keep moving along. So next we have our reports from the Assembly Chair and Mayor. I don't have a specific, I guess the only thing I'll say is my intent for this meeting was to announce who our new youth reps are. And thanks for everybody who provided input. I did not get that far because I was prepping for other things. And so my intent will be to make that decision by the end of the week, make sure we let all of the candidates know first, and then I'll ask staff to notify folks by email. And then either way, the first meeting of that those folks will be participating. I do intend to nominate or to select more than one, so I'll say that too. And so their first meeting will be September 1st. So I think that's my report right now because I'm on the agenda in other places. So then I will turn to Ms. Fleet Green to Suzanne with an S, 2 S's for the mayor's report. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Great. Thank you very much. For the record, Suzanne Fleet Green, Chief of Staff to Mayor Suzanne LaFrance. And yes, one of us is with an S and one of us is with a Z. Just a few quick updates. First, I'll just start with the amazing Arctic Thunder Air Show that occurred. It was wonderful, frankly, to walk around town, even during the practice days, and see people stopping what they were doing to look up and take video of the event that was happening. So that was great. The mayor's office, we had a booth, and so did the Anchorage Police Department, as well as transit. And there was also a booth there on waste to energy, which got really good interest and support. I will say we had a special bus route for the first time in a long time from the Northway Mall to base. And at one point I heard that it was gangbusters and packed like sardines. And in the afternoon on Saturday, once they were full on base and had to close the gate, it was the only 2 ways that you could get on were either on the bus or by biking. So that was fantastic. Also want to let you know, I think you're all reading about it as well, but the mayor has had a couple of meetings now with NSTAR regarding this winter and gas shortage issues as well as price issues. And I think that's a conversation that we will be coming back to the assembly to engage further on, whether or not that looks like a work session or something else to talk about what the municipality can do in our buildings, but also what we can do to help residents this winter. That would be probably a very productive conversation. We also have had some conversations with the Anchorage School District about what they're looking at for their 92 buildings, so that we can try and frankly conserve some gas so we don't run out of gas or increase prices. So we'll come back to you more on that. Also, I think all of you know that we are having a series of public meetings on the waste to energy project. So far, so good. Looking forward to a lot more engagement on that, and certainly fits into the whole energy conversation that we are having. We had a good legislative committee meeting last week where we got an update from Brownstein on the federal housing bill. That was interesting. So we will definitely be working with them as requested to get updates on any regulations that come out as the Department of Housing and Urban Development implements that bill. We are also watching the appropriations process. Right now, it looks like we will have a continuing resolution until December, which isn't very gratifying because we were hoping that we would know more on our federal funding requests as bills individually come out of committee, but we will just be left waiting on that. But we are looking for ways to potentially still get additional funds in a continuing resolution. Again, looking back at the energy situation, if there's anything that we can push for that would help residents in the near term this winter to help cope with that. So we'll be watching just what that CR looks like and how our delegation maybe can influence it before it is fully baked. And then lastly, I just want to talk about the AEDC lunch. It was great. Many of us were there. It did have some still sobering messages to all of us about economic headwinds, but also had a good positive note in terms of the opportunities that we have both from the health industry, from JBER, so growth areas. And I'm sure you all saw that AEDC announced that it had created a SEDS committee so that they could write a community economic development plan. And we think that's another place for partnership with the assembly of how we engage on that SEDS committee. So we have reached out to AEDC to see what that might look like probably in the next month or so.
Okay, thank you. I'll also note we were joined at about 1:05 by Daniel Boland. And any questions for Suzanne? Okay, I'll just mention one quick follow-up. Certainly the energy conversation is relevant, and whether it's a meeting or whether it's discussed through the Enterprise and Utility Committee, I'll leave that to the chairs of that, or certainly happy to schedule a work session. So yeah, definitely a topic of interest as we go into the fall. Okay, don't see any other questions, so we will move on to, and again, I'll keep an eye on the phone for texting, but if members on the phone, if I miss you, just speak up. Next, we'll move on. We got reports from our various departments, so I will start with the clerk. Jamie, if you have any updates.
Thank you. Our new budget analyst started on August 3rd. She has been working, getting our 2027 budgets entered for OMB to prepare their budget books. And Anna will be doing a formal introduction with her at the Budget and Finance Committee next week. In the licensing realm, we have just about gotten to our 2,500 short-term rentals registered since May 1st. That has been the theme of the summer. For records requests, our records requests are up. We've had 14 of them in the last month. There's been 31 for 2026. We had 10 record requests in 2025 and 21 requests in 2024. The agenda team, I never want to leave them out, but you guys always see the work that they do directly. So you know how many meetings they're processing and how much legislation they're processing. And then the elections team received an application for initiative petition. It is currently with legal review, but it was approved last year, so we anticipate approval this year as well. And they're also reviewing our annual Title 28 ordinance with the sponsors, and you'll be seeing that in the next several weeks.
Questions for Jamie? Sorry, Jared, trying to switch to first names.
Yeah. Can you tell us what's the petition? I'm not familiar with what that might be.
Office of Inspector General.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, and then I'll just briefly note, I know the Short-term rental registration is of interest, so we'll come back to that when we have kind of more complete data as far as we understand. So we'll have a more fulsome discussion about that, but just note that is ongoing. Next, I will turn to Assembly Council. Dean or Matthew, if you have updates.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's been a busy summer. I don't have anything particularly to report other than continuing working on legislation and interpreting the law for you all. And I guess the main thing is we had our summer intern, Zach, whose last day is Friday, I believe. But we appreciated having him here. So before he goes, though, prepare to be awed by his presentation today. So, thank you, Zach.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll have a presentation a little bit later. Any questions for Dean? Okay, next we'll go to Legislative Services. I'll turn to Claire.
All right, we've been busy with a lot of press releases and emails this month. We also have done some new stuff with Civic Anchor. This month's display is Waste to Energy, so check that out at Lusac Library. And then we also installed a display up at the Eagle River Town Center, and we're going to try that out, having a display up there as well. And this month's deep dive is Waste to Energy as well. And we're getting that email just went out this morning, and we're getting tons of great feedback. So I'm going to forward some messages to you that we got. Also, I'm not sure if you know this, but me and another municipal staff person, Emily Bokar, on the I team have been organizing municipal staff who work on civic engagement. And we did a fun tour of the landfill together for our social fun event this summer. And then we're having a lunch and learn with Ari from Federation of Community Councils, so she can tell us more about the civic scan, and staff can figure out how to apply that in our work. Some cool things that's going on in the municipality that I'm not sure the chief of staff covered. OMB gave some really great classes, and they opened it up to all staff of just how the budget works and how to do different things with filing your budget and doing classification changes. And they were widely attended and I thought really wonderful. So I wanted to put a plug in for that in case you hadn't heard about it. Purchasing is doing a software change for the online way that we do our purchasing and shopping carts. So hopefully there'll be some improvements with that. And then we are refreshing muni.org. It's a little bit behind schedule because our website is giant, but hopefully that will happen by the end of the year. And then the annual employee survey is going to run from August 24th through September 18th. Then finally, I have updated the district maps and contacts, there's one outside the door that are laminated. So if any of you want it for your offices, just let me know. I have some extra copies. And that is it for me.
Okay, questions for Claire? My only question is just to confirm, I believe we will have our staff member returning from maternity leave, Allie. So do you know, can you remind us what the date is or what we know right now?
What we know right now. Yes, Allie is planning to come back at the beginning of September. She has not gone far. She's been watching a lot of the meetings. She might even be watching right now.
Hi, Allie.
She's just kind of addicted to municipal government. And so luckily she's been staying engaged over the summer, so it shouldn't be too hard to catch her back up to speed when she gets back.
Sounds good. Yeah, so we'll look forward to welcoming her back next month. Okay, then last under reports, I'll invite up the ombudsman folks to come give a report. And I'll also note, I know we are going to be hearing, not at this meeting, but next meeting, a report on their annual report as well. So we had to bump it for some other topics, but I'll come back to that. But I will turn to Daryl and Drew.
First, I want to wish, if case Allie is listening, I believe yesterday was her birthday. So wish her a happy birthday.
Drew Ford, Deputy Ombudsman. I'll be quick because I know you have a lot to get through. We did finish our annual report. We missed the deadline to submit to the clerk, but we are planning to have it on the addendum for the agenda on the 18th. There's copies here if you would like to take one. We also pulled out of our annual report a flowchart and explanation of how complaints work in our office. That's a new outreach material that we have. We are still a two-man team until Heather returns. She is on leave until August 30th. When she gets back, she will be in the office while Daryl and I are at the annual Ombudsman Association conference in Traverse City.
Wow, that was quick. We, we're trying to arrange a tour of Anchorage Memorial Park Cemetery with our legislators and the assembly members for the district and the chair. Our office over the last 2 or 3 years has fielded a lot of concerns from constituents regarding the maintenance of the cemetery, the fence, the stairs at the columbarium wall. We've actually had conversations with the legislators for the area who are interested in possibly doing a legislative appropriation for the cemetery. Personally, I love the cemetery. I help facilitate our office helps facilitate the Soul in the Cemetery tour every year. We help facilitate the Pride Memorial Service every year. And we're actually going to host, we're planning a Halloween tour on October 31st called Murder, Mayhem, and Tragedy in the Anchorage Cemetery. So we'll be sending you all invites to that. So it's just our way of saying that, the Anchorage Memorial Park Cemetery is a National Historic Site. It is one of the, to me, the crown jewels of downtown Anchorage. And, we are interested in doing whatever we can to help facilitate a conversation about the future maintenance of the cemetery. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ombudsman folks? Okay, not seeing any. Thanks guys for being here. And yeah, we'll look for the annual report and then we'll cover it at our next rules meeting for sure. Okay, so that's our reports. I'm going to note we do have unfinished business and committees. My intent, and I should have said this at the beginning, my intent was to move that further down. I think I need to go back and check, but it was, I believe, after the travel and spending policies discussion. I know we have a lot of things to get through and we will not have enough time to fully complete any of them. So we'll do what we can. But anyway, we're going to skip past that one. And then next we're going to go to our, just a brief presentation governance moment that I'm going to give. And then I'll also note, then we'll have quick update on ASD. Aaron has a presentation on best practices with school closure, and then we'll go to Zach for legislative immunity. And then we have a whole bunch of other stuff to do as well. So I'll keep us moving as best I can. So Jamie, if you could pull up that presentation.
Sorry, which one?
The governance moment one. And then I'm pulling up my own version as well. Just thinking, yeah.
She's forgiving, good.
That's not
government.
my last
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is just brief. I feel like it's hard to. I should say. So part of this committee is really, or it's been used in the past for things like training and just having a kind of open opportunity to talk about how we do our business, knowing, of course, that we have to do all of that in public, and so it makes it challenging as a group for us to kind of get used to working together. So. So what I want to talk about today, and also this is a preview of a proposal to both change the name of this committee to the governance committee, but also to make sure that we build in kind of ongoing opportunities to continue to discuss this together. So next slide, please. So today, what I'm really going to talk about is our meeting. So I want to offer a few kind of observations, at least since my time starting as chair, and kind of how I see that we're working together as a group. So I also want to preface and say, this is not to rehash things that we've already talked about, like items on our agenda. It is not to call out individuals. It is really to kind of give us maybe some common language to understand where we are as a group and think about that in that way. Because I know there's, as I have up here, each of us, we're a member of the assembly, we're a member of a governing body, so that we're individuals, we're part of this group. And then I also want to offer that basically we are one part of a very large, complex live production that is our meetings. And I am a theater kid, so I'm going to be using some theater. Yeah, I see some support from fellow theater kid, one of our attorneys. But really, I want folks to think about it that way, because that might not be how you think about these meetings. But also, we are, again, just one part of a much larger production that happens every 2 weeks, and all of our business really is tied to a lot of these. So next slide. So to back up a little bit, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've said this individually to a lot of folks. I am a I guess, terminal management and process consultant. And so this is the lens that I look at everything. So there's the political lens, but there's also the organizational lens. And what I've observed about our group and really a number of other kind of spaces is that we are in what is kind of a well-documented or well-theorized process of group development. And so that is Mr. Bruce Tuckman, who I do not know. This was created actually before the Muni even existed. It's from the 1960s, and this theory has been put forward over time. But generally the idea being that with any groups, whether it's a board, this body, a staff team, this is really an HR thing, that we're always in different stages of development. So those stages are, and I'll read them briefly: forming, storming, norming, performing, and ending, which does not rhyme with any of those. But it's really just recognizing that again, when you have individuals, there's a different layer of dynamic with the group itself that no one individual owns, but we all have a piece of. And so that's what I really want to put on the table. So generally the way this theory works is that every group is cycling through one of these things. It's not that you get to the end and then it just always continues that way forever. The same group can cycle back depending on what happens. And then as you have new members, of course, that changes. So what I'm seeing is that I believe, right now we're kind of in the storming phase, right? We're past the initial part when some new members join the body. We're still forming what that looks like as well. But really, we've gone through some, obviously there's specific reasons why we had conflict the last few meetings. And I'm, again, not here to talk about those things, but really to note that the dynamic itself is something to be aware of and to notice. And of course, again, I'm not trying to solve individual issues, but really just noting that this seems to be, both what we are experiencing and also what others are watching our meetings and seeing. So I wanted to name it. I wanted to give it kind of a framework. And I think as we move through it, that is a normal part of a group process. So I think as we move forward, we're going to be in the norming phase. I think we're getting there, right? People are getting more comfortable with their jobs. They're working on specific projects. A lot of you, of course, have been here more than 90 days or 100 days and are working on that. But again, the group itself is an entity that is bigger than any one of us. And so that's what I'm trying to describe. And then, of course, the goal is to get to what they call performing. So folks, it's not just about individuals figuring out their jobs, but also that we all have an understanding of how our rules work, what we're doing, and there's a lot of kind of those relationships and dynamics that build. So I think that, so I see that that's where we're going to eventually end up. It is not an inevitability, but I wanted to name again, kind of like, I feel like this is where we are. And if it was a board of directors, if there was any other type of organization, this is the kind of conversation we would be having as a leadership group. And I'll also note here the ending, that is part of the theory because things end. And so obviously, we are not a work team. We're not something that just gets dissolved because the assembly exists for other reasons. But every time that we have new members, this process starts over. So I want to note too, that is part of the life cycle. And then when that happens, there's a mix of both good feelings and grief, and sadness when things leave. And so when you are on this body long enough and you see a bunch of members leaving, it's not just that those individuals are leaving, it's because that particular dynamic has ended and a new one has started. So again, I just wanted to give us some language to think about that. Just kind of where we are, and it's the meta level beyond the specific things we're talking about. It's how we're working together and how we gel together as a group. Next slide, please. So I want to also introduce that our meetings are, and I'm saying another kind of political theater. I know those terms get thrown around a lot, but I am seriously using this as a metaphor because I think it is basically a giant improv production. And I want folks to think about the fact that it's not just the 12 of us. We're the cast in something that has a crew. It has there isn't really a director per se, but there's a lot of other participants, and that creates a very complex group dynamic in that room at any given time. And it is not something that it is one person's job to manage. And I think that's something that I've actually just candidly been struggling with, is how much, I can't control a lot of these things. I'm not trying to control them, but that we all own a piece of this. So just to run through these briefly, obviously we do have a script. It's our agenda. It's all of our rules. It's the way we have to do things, but mostly things unfold in real time. People ask me all the time, what's going to happen with this item? And I say, I genuinely don't know, because it's not just up to me, right? It's up to not just the individual choices, but kind of how things play out in that meeting. The chair and the vice chair, in some ways we are directors, but we're also not. We're not telling members what to do. We're not telling the public what to do. And we're really just trying to, again, manage this big improv thing in real time as best we can and keep folks on track. And of course, the clerk has another big role in that, keeping order, making sure that we're following procedure. The public is both a participant and the audience, so they're watching us, but they're also part of this participation. I won't go into theater in the round and all these other kind of theories around that, but it is just true that they are part of this dynamic. And also I want folks to understand and just be, again, explicit. There's a large crew of technical staff who do our work. There's the clerk. There's of course, the mayor's an actor in this as well, but the administration, they're there to provide information. You probably noticed there's about 10 or 12 directors sitting in the back at any given time. Our attorneys are also part of this, and they're asked to respond to these things in real time, especially with real legal questions. And then our IT and AV, of course, we've had some issues with that, but that is also part of the work. We don't tell the AV folks, who to focus on, or, that's their job in the recording. But all of that is happening in real time as we are trying to do our work. And the choices we make do affect those folks' work as well. I'll also note that our production is really scheduled by rules and the clock. So we have a set period of time to do our business in a given night. And mostly what we have to do is set in law. Not everything. There's a lot of choices we have, a lot of free agency we have, and what we do sets precedent. So that's why we have to think about, again, and I know this may feel like I'm lecturing to folks who have been here a while and have heard this, but I think it is really important, again, to say these things and to really reflect on this level of the work. Next slide, please. I only have a few here. This is a lot of text. I was writing it down mostly so that folks have it, but I just want to note, in terms of meeting procedure, these are things to think about. And I want to also note some of these have really been friction points, not just for the way that we're working together, but also for the staff. So I'll call out just a few of them. One is that, we want to be doing our business effectively. I want to offer that ending our meetings as soon as possible is not the primary goal of our meetings, right? It is a good goal. It is something we should do. But also, if we need to take more time on things, if we need to postpone something, the goal is not necessarily to pass every single thing on the agenda in a given meeting. And so I want to offer that we have the opportunity to postpone things, to set a work session. If there's a lot of amendments, you can postpone something and then come back to it, right? Some things are urgent, most things are not. So that's something to think about, is kind of how the tools we have, how you can use them, and when we use our time in those Tuesday meetings or not. To the next one, timing matters. Our meetings are noticed to end at 11 p.m. So our last meeting ended pretty abruptly because we didn't extend it. And there was some discussion. We're looking into kind of what is the legal nuance there, like how do we provide good direction to members. But it's also just true that the charter adjourns our meetings at midnight, no matter what. Ours, the school boards, and actually boards and commissions too. And so in order to fit all of that in a given meeting without always going to 11 p.m. or midnight, we have to think about how we're using our time. The debate, this is another piece of it. It's in code. We have a 1 hour debate limit for items. So we've seen, you can extend that through a motion, but generally speaking, the idea being that we are not filibustering, we're not spending infinite time on one thing. It is really a time management thing. And so you've probably seen me say a lot of things that are basically time management suggestions. And that's why, because I'm trying to do the math on, if we all talk for 2 minutes on everything, then what is that going to look like? So again, these are things that I'm not offering these to control how people behave or anything like that, but just these are things that we all have to think about because this is the way our meetings work. Next one, debate can be informal, but it's not a conversation. I think it's a mind shift where even if you are responding to something someone said, it might have been 3 people ago because there's a queue of people. So really what we're doing is just kind of speaking into the ether, right? Whether it's to other members or the public or whatever we want to say on the record. But I just want to be clear too, we have a process because I know there's been some questions. Everybody can speak twice to an item. These are things we can suspend the rules for, but generally we try to follow these rules again, because we have 1 hour total for debate unless we extend it. And then if you'll see me jump the queue for somebody, it's because, and the clerk does keep track of this, I try to recognize people who haven't spoken yet on that item. And so the list includes every amendment you can speak twice, the main item you can speak twice, every motion, unless it's not debatable, you can. So if folks want to see that, the clerk can show you kind of the checklist they use to track that, but that's where that's coming from. And then lastly, I'll just offer 2 things that are taking a lot of extra time for staff and make it harder for, I think, all of us to do our jobs. One is verbal amendments. They are certainly welcome and allowed, but I highly recommend if you're going to do one, and I know sometimes it's just the way things flow, right? And you didn't plan it ahead of time. Even if you are going to do a verbal amendment, I highly recommend doing it in writing, like work it out by email, send an email to the clerk so that they have it, because they're trying to write it in real time and put it up on the board. And I think the more that we do verbal amendments, the more that it slows our pace down. It makes it harder for other members to track. And it's also hard for the clerk. And so I just would offer, it doesn't mean you have to do something hours in advance, but if you can just even send an email to the clerk so that you can say, here's my intent, here's what I'm going to verbally move. So that's a point of friction that I've seen in terms of our procedure. The second one, laid on the table items, there's reasons we do them. They are not inherently good or bad, but what it does mean is that that item is not in the public record, except it's in a packet, a PDF, and that's a process we just started. And so it's harder for the clerks to process those afterwards. They're not noticed ahead of time. Again, there's reasons we use these, but that's why we also say they're discouraged, because it is better to have things in the record planned out in advance, because that's the pace that we have to do our work. We are not a instantly reactive body. We generally have a 2-week pace or a 4-week pace that we have to do everything. And so, anyway, so I know I've talked a lot, but I wanted to offer these just as kind of feedback on what I'm seeing as this group dynamic, some areas that I think we can think about improving our procedure. And again, as we continue to work together as a body, ways that we can make our meetings, I think, run a little bit more smoothly. So I guess if you can go to I think it's the last slide. Yeah. So I just wanted to offer, because I know we have a lot of other business, but I intend to bring additional governance topics back. So I want to talk about kind of what happens behind the scenes, and make opportunities for folks to participate in leadership meetings. So for example, Daniel's not going to be at our meeting on the 18th. Aaron is going to step in as acting vice chair for that meeting. So there's other opportunities like that. Whether or not you are acting as the vice chair, you can be a third member in these meetings. And some of us have done this in the past. So ways to kind of learn behind the scenes, all of this pre-work. Every single meeting that we do has 3 pre-planning meetings that takes about the 2 weeks before those meetings. So it's important to understand. We'll talk about legislative process. We can go through examples, pro tips from other members, how you've done other projects. I think that can be helpful to learn. We've got some procedures and legal issues, quasi-judicial training we've been talking about doing for months. So we're going to do that soon from our attorneys, what that looks like and how that's different than our normal work. We can talk about committee best practices. And then just in general, if there's things that you want to unpack, either kind of debriefing something that happened or kind of thinking about how would I approach this, that's things we can talk about in this meeting. So with that, again, I know I talked a lot. I know it's a lot of information, but I think it is important for us to think about these group dynamics, and how we can make sure that our meetings are running smoothly, because it affects a lot of other people as well, including the public. So with that, I'll see if there's any, just brief comments, reactions, or other things you'd like to touch on, but I know we also have other business. Okay. And again, this is an ongoing topic. We will come back to it. And also, I forgot to note earlier that we were joined in person by Yarrow, I think about 15 minutes ago. So she was previously on the phone. Okay, so with that, we will move on to our next topic, the brief update on the ASD School Board Right Sizing Committee and Assembly Liaison. This is I'll just give a brief verbal update. This is a topic that was addressed at our joint meeting on June 5th with the school board. Our next meeting with them is not until September 18th. And I know there's been questions about a motion that was made and what the impact of that was. So I will give a brief kind of update from where I am and happy to take questions. So as I understand it, I spoke with President Carl Jacobs after that motion was made to discuss kind of what the board's intent was, what their further discussion about the topic of school closures, right sizing, and what that broad conversation looks like and who would be involved in what way. And I know there's been a lot of other side conversations. The very brief version is we had basically a motion to say, I think there was some confusion. I think my interpretation of that motion was not that motion in itself created a committee, but it said we would like to see a proposal about what a joint committee or joint effort would look like, and that the school board president and the chair needed to talk about that. So I did follow up with Carl. I think it must have been after the June 5th meeting. The board had a discussion, they had a retreat discussing kind of formation of that committee, what it should look like. And they talked about, do we want it to be a joint committee or do we want it to be a school board committee? I was not in those conversations. My understanding is there was, split opinions on that. But at the end of the day, the majority of the school board decided they directed the president to form an ad hoc committee of the school board to discuss right sizing. And appoint some members to it. And then they were open to having an assembly liaison to that, so a non-voting position. I know that generated a lot of back and forth conversation with several members, but at the end of the day, that's what the school board decided to do. And so I forwarded the email that I received in July asking for me to appoint a liaison. I had a conversation with a couple different members who I know are interested in this topic. And ultimately I appointed Janice Park as that liaison. And so, which she was interested in doing. And so right now, as I understand it, that committee, I don't know their schedule. They are meeting. They intend to have their meetings in public. There are 3 members. The chair is Paul McDonough. The other members are Rachel Blakesley and Margot Bellamy. I've not talked to them directly about that committee because I'm trying to not be involved in every single thing that I have to deal with. So that's where it is right now. So I don't know if, Janice, if you want to, sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know if you want to give an update and then also open discussion from other members, but yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I have not heard anything from them yet. I did put a call into Carl about a month ago. Haven't heard back.
Yeah, thanks. So I know that committee is getting organized, and so Paul McDonough is the point of contact for it. Sydney.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'll just share for the record my memory of the motion, which I did write down before making it because it was very explicit and specific that what we had heard at that meeting was that the school board was proposing to put together a right sizing committee with 3 school board directors and 1 assembly liaison. The motion that I proposed at that meeting was in reaction to that structure and had equal representation for assembly members and school board directors, and included voting rights for assembly members, given that we own these buildings and we also represent these members of the community. So, I don't want to derail us in this meeting, but I do want to share that for the record that this proposal does not comply with the motion that was unanimously approved at that joint meeting. And I intend to keep bringing this topic up and pushing for more assembly representation and influence in this conversation that impacts all of us, particularly because we as assembly members represent specific neighborhoods and community members, and the school board is all at large. I think we have a different perspective. I'm very glad to see somebody from Midtown as our liaison, given the history with Campbell STEM specifically, but I think there's more work to be done here, and I guess just sharing in the spirit of Rules Committee that I intend to continue this conversation.
Jared.
Yeah, I would just say that, my recollection is exactly as Sydney's was as well. And so that back and forth obviously involved me and Sydney and Carl Jacobs. And I think it's symbolic of a lot of problems the school board's having right now, where we make a joint commitment between the school board and the assembly, and then they decide to go do their own thing anyways. Like that's the whole problem with the school board right now. So that's really disappointing. And yes, I'm sure Janice is going to advocate well for us, but this should be a equal collaboration because Sydney's right. It's our resources as well. They're not just operating in a vacuum here. These are our buildings. And so right sizing, closing schools, whatever that looks like, we necessarily have to have a say in this process. So we're not just handed, a big old turd at the end of this process. Here you go. This is what it is. We needed that representation. And it's really disappointing that the school board has opted to not honor the agreement that we had, that they unanimously voted for. So that's it.
Okay, other comments? Dom?
Yeah, I would echo my colleagues here on this, and I'm just a little bit confused, I guess, how this was set up, because it seemed like, I mean, we're by code or by charter, we have once a quarter where we're meeting with the school board and trying to kind of have that collaborative effort. So it seems like the founders of Anchorage here kind of said like, hey, they want us to be united on certain things. And then it seems like this committee, which I thought was supposed to be kind of both of our bodies and stuff, hey, having a small group has kind of morphed now into it's a school board committee that they have invited one ad hoc member to. And so I guess I'm kind of confused. Is that kind of roughly what it is?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So my understanding, and I should also say I probably had maybe at least 25 hours of conversation about this between the mayor, ASD. I mean, so just to say, like, there has been a lot of, I've tried to talk to as many people as I legally could about this and tried to resolve it and tried to bring that perspective to the school board president, to everybody. So, and so I'm trying to resolve it. I think, and I know there's been a question to our attorneys about what is the legal weight of that motion. I mean, so yes, and I think what Sydney said is correct, that the school board had talked about doing this because there was a couple members who were interested in it. At that time, there was I think some members wanted it to be a joint committee, others didn't, and there wasn't maybe, I mean, I was not in those rooms, so I can't really speak on their behalf. Then it was brought to our meeting in June. That motion was made toward the end of the meeting. And then I tried to, in good faith, follow through with that direction, but I cannot force the school board to do anything, really. I can't force the board president to do anything. And so what they have said too is they are public meetings, and so other members are welcome to participate. So, and then I've told other members who are interested, you're welcome to go to those meetings. At the end of the day, it is tricky because the decision to close schools is the school board's decision. It is not our decision. And so we also have to be mindful of our lanes in the charter, to the point about, what are our roles? Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. This is an interesting one because we have two independent bodies, right? And it does feel like we voted on something, and I would want them to honor that for sure. But we also have oversight over different things, and I think, as Anna pointed out, they have say over some things, and we have say over other things, and maybe as part of negotiations, those things are used to leverage. I don't know, but I don't see this committee as having. I think it's a conversation, it's a discussion, and maybe they come forward with recommendations as far as their work product. Here's the process we should be looking at when it comes to considering school closures. But the committee in and of itself isn't going to be making any formal decisions. They'd have to bring it back to the body who's making the actual decision point. One thing I do worry a little bit, and I think I said this at our joint meeting with the school board, is how much do assembly members, and this is just something for us all to consider collectively or individually, how much do assembly members want to insert ourselves in this process? How much ownership do we want to have over which schools should be closed and which shouldn't? I mean, I think that puts us in perilous waters, and some of the energy that the school board is having to deal with in terms of constituent feedback, we may bring that upon ourselves. So just sort of an admonition to all of us as something to consider. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I have Yarrow, then Aaron.
So I do think that this is the school board's lane, right? Like, this is what they do. This is what they were elected to do. But I think that we kind of stepped in and wanted to form this committee. I think that it can be seen as kind of a vote of non-confidence in some of the decisions that they've made with school closures. And so I guess I think the real question is, like, how do we address that? How do we address the the non-confidence? How do we move forward? What is our role? What is our power?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Erin?
Yeah, thanks. My broader reaction to the news of this ad hoc school board committee is actually the next item on our agenda, which we'll get to. But as far as that particular joint meeting goes, it was absolutely my recollection that the purpose of the joint committee was not to make specific recommendations about which schools would close. It was the development of a rubric and a statement of shared values and how and why we would eventually make the decision to close schools, and that development of that framework was the purpose of the joint committee or the eventual joint committee. It was not to make specific decisions or to create a list of recommendations about which schools ought to be closed. And I think those are separate propositions, and one is absolutely ours to participate in, and the other is squarely the purview of the school board and the administration. And so I think I'm likewise really disappointed that ASD chose what appears to be far more of a circle the wagons approach as opposed to a collaborative one. And I think that there is some work to do to potentially prevail upon the school board to open that process up to the assembly in a different way. I'm not clear how exactly we make that case, but I do think that it's a conversation that should not be considered closed at this time. And that's just my 2 cents.
Next, Daniel, then Donald.
I might have been out of the room when you said this, but what's the timeliness of this? When would like the first meeting of this committee be? You know?
So my understanding is they were looking for a meeting in July. I sent out the email that I had sent previously is pretty much everything I know about it. It has a charter. It's supposed to go until the end of the year, but it could get extended into the new year. I think their intent is to have more of a at least hypothetical framework of how they would approach a school closure decision. But that's what I know right now.
Okay. I'm wondering if one tool to sort of state the preference of the assembly could be an assembly resolution, recalling the motion that Sydney described, and resolving that there should be a minimum of 3 assembly members as part of this joint committee. And then that, if that were to pass, then could be provided, remitted to the school board for their consideration.
So I've got Donald and then Sydney. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Sydney.
It's in progress.
Okay. Donald.
So my question is, I guess, with the joint school, maybe this is more for the lawyers of, I guess, like, what's the legal binding? I mean, we're calling to order. We have to have 7 members. We're treating it as an official meeting, but then it seems like motions are, I guess, not necessarily legally binding. And so, I mean, I get they've got 7 members, we've got 12. It would be kind of weird if we were just kind of overriding the school board there in the meeting. And so if we're wanting to pursue this action in the future, I guess, what is the proper process for doing that? Do we sit there and say, hey, if you guys don't want to do a thing, like, we sit there and form, well, we're going to form our own assembly like committee, and we're going to invite 3 school board members because we like that structure better? Like,
Yeah, I think I'll turn to the attorneys in a second. I will just note in our joint meetings, there's been other, I guess, specific things where we're really unpacking what does it mean to act as a joint body there. The fundamental fact is that it's actually any vote that we're taking is the 12 of us and the 7 of the school board. And so if all 12 of us vote for something and all 7 vote against it, it's still going to fail because it did not pass with the majority of both bodies. So that's kind of just the procedure. And then Dean or Matthew, if you have an answer on the kind of, is the motion legally binding, or what does that look like?
also, just question, didn't it was unanimous, so both bodies passed it. Is it
Right, I think
officially,
what
like,
you're
I guess,
asking
in
is
our
what-
minutes
then what
for
happens?
both?
Help refine the question a little bit. Okay. I want to know if the school board is bound to Robert's rules, and if by not honoring a motion that we took, they are out of order.
Well, I will try to answer as best I can. These are all very good questions, of course. I'm not speaking to the merits, I think, of the whole notion of this joint committee that was intended to be formed and what they were trying to address is school closures. But as some of you have identified, that there's the school board's lane and the assembly's lane, and the operation and management of schools and the school closure decision is the school board's jurisdiction. So, but the question though is about legally binding motions for these joint meetings. The charter actually calls them joint conferences, and now are not actual like business meetings like our regular meeting where we do assembly business. I had, I guess, advised a couple members that I'd share with the rest of you that these actions or motions that pass, there are generally political questions. We don't have any legal standing to sort of enforce them, you know, if they aren't complied with. And so you can, of course, procedurally, we made our rules so that you can pass some motions to get some things done and so forth. But if there's non-cooperation, we don't have, in my opinion, a legal sort of basis to enforce or compel compliance. And if it's not done, take it to court and try to do that. It's a political question, so it's not justiciable to court. So I think that it's all based on, I guess, in Robert's rules, the final decision of the bodies. You know, so you have 12 assembly members, you could say, without motion was valid, and 7 school board members. They can say, well, it's not binding, we're going to do what we want. And if it's management and operations related, I guess they can do that. This is actually sort of new territory in terms of a motion to form a committee and how that should be treated. And we have, I think, just recently updated the procedures and code for those joint meetings and how motions can be handled. So I'm not sure if I fully answered the question about how these joint motions are processed and how they affect the body. And as complaints with Robert's rules, for example, can a member say point of order to the school board's, I guess, non-compliance? And I guess who do you appeal that to? The chair of the assembly or the president of the school board? I'm not quite sure, you know, how that should play out. Who handles that point of order? Or maybe it's who's presiding over that joint conference at the time. So there's a lot of, I guess, uncertainty, is what I could say. I invite, though, of course, any other attorneys in the room to supplement or disagree with what I've said.
Okay. Thanks, Dean. And I'll just briefly add too, it is true in each of our meetings, I guess joint conference is the technical term. Either the assembly chair or the school board president is considered the presiding officer, and then basically the other person is the vice chair in that sense. So that is set up. But I think, as we've said, those are not meetings in the same sense, and we don't hold the other body accountable in the same way that we do to ours. I think Aaron had a question and Daniel. Statement. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, this is interesting. So I guess I am interested then in, you know, we operate by Robert's rules. So our meetings with the Native Village of Eklutna, are those also considered joint conferences? I mean, I know there's different layers there because they're a government to government relationship, but are those described similarly?
Well, I actually need to look it up. If that's
Okay.
not in charter,
Okay.
that's only in code.
Well, we can put a pin on it, and if y'all want to research, but I guess my follow along to that would be, I would be interested then in a legislative project that would specify that for joint conferences, both parties have to operate by Robert's rules. Because there should be an expectation that if we are having these meetings in good faith with another party, that we're all operating under the same expectations. So that might be something that we want to put in code. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly add on that. This has been because of something that happened in the last June 2025 meeting, it's been on our list, the branches list to get some code changes done. We just haven't gotten back to it. There's about 5 of those things. So, and to kind of resolve these broad questions. Janice, did you have on this topic? Because I know Aaron, you said different topics. So did you have on this one?
Yes, thank you. I think it's good to keep in mind that we are, this body and the school board are elected officials elected to a specific task or set of tasks. And as Member Silver said, by passing the resolution in the last Member Scout referred to, that is something of a vote of no confidence. And I would just ask the members of this body to consider how we would feel and whether we would accept a proportional number of school board members appointed to a committee to perhaps dictate to us what our duties are. And I think that neither of those situations would contribute to a harmonious working relationship.
Okay, next I'll turn to Aaron.
Thank you. Taking us in a slightly different direction. So one of the things that was troubling to me as I read through the announcement of the establishment of this ad hoc committee was actually the timeframe allocated for the work compared to the scope of work. I don't know if any of you took note of that as you read through, but the scope of work is to gather meaningful community feedback. So a whole lot of ancillary statements about that. Develop recommended guiding principles and evaluation criteria that could be used for future right-sizing proposals, used to evaluate them. Identifying strategies to improve communication, transparency, and community engagement. Recommending a planning timeline and a public engagement process that provides for stakeholder engagement in advance of closures or right-sizing proposals, and reviewing lessons learned from previous right-sizing efforts and identifying opportunities to improve future planning and implementation. That is the scope of work for an ad hoc committee that's supposed to meet from July 16th until the end of December, which is absurd. That is an absurd scope of work for that time frame, which suggests to me that either this committee is entirely performative or it's just really poorly conceived. And either way, that's not great news. Because we all just experienced what it is like to go through a school closure cycle. Perhaps I'm a teensy bit more sensitive than the rest of us about this, but we just experienced what it's like to go through that cycle having had absolutely no skin in the game and having to deal with the fallout on the backside, which is not a position that I would like to be in as a policymaker. And now we are in a separate process, which again is the genesis of my next agenda item, is what we do with the school, with the building and the parcel once the school itself has been closed. So to me, this is not about stepping on anyone's toes so much as it is us occupying a sphere of influence that, in my estimation, is ours to occupy based on charter. And I appreciate why, for a district that has come under fire pretty heavily over the last couple of years, that would feel like an insertion, that would feel like a vote of no confidence. It is also an opportunity for us to partner in a very specific way and potentially do some trust building and repair with the community at the same time, because the community feels incredibly burned. And I think the outcome of the education bond and special levy point to that reality. And candidly, this body, the municipality of Anchorage, cannot afford another round of failed education bonds. So, I mean, I get the sensitivity on the part of the school board, but I think that sensitivity needs to take a back seat to pragmatism, which is where we're at, in my opinion. So I think I will save the rest of my remarks for my presentation. Thank you all.
Thanks. Anyone else on this topic? Okay, I'll just briefly say, then we will pivot to the next thing. I know we have a bunch of other business.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Dean.
Well, I thought I would answer the question I definitely answered. The need to include I've just identified. Well, the code section is titled Joint Conferences for both the school board and the individual cleaner, but the two subsections having the contrast in language. But basically, pretty much meaning the same thing. The native village of Vicuña's language doesn't say joint conference, but it does fashion its language after the school board's charter language.
Yeah, and of course, Dana Village of Acuna is a government entity it's not, well, it's its own kind of government entity. It's not the same as a political subdivision of the municipality. Okay, so we'll pivot over to Aaron's presentation, but the last thing I'll say on this topic is one, that I tried, two, that I am not a higher authority that can be appealed to make things happen, and that I have limited time in the day. And so I have tried to solve this issue. I understand there is disagreement. I welcome others bringing that resolution with the caution that I don't know if there is a precedent of us sending a resolution to the school board about the school board. So I would be very, I'm going to be looking at it from that lens. And also that I think I'm going to underscore what Dean said. These are political questions. There is, again, no higher authority that can be appealed to solve this issue or adjudicate it the way that you would in court. It is just not. And so we are the grownups in the room collectively, and so are those 7 other people. And I can't force 18 other people to do anything. And so I guess what I'm saying is I am not going to spend a whole much more time on this because I cannot solve it for everybody. It is not my job to solve it for everybody. And at some point, we do not have control over the school board. And so, go ahead, Dane.
So I actually don't think anybody's asking you to solve it for us. And so that's why I recommended that the body take a position. And I say that with much appreciation for the conversations and time that you've spent on this, because I certainly haven't. But I think it may be better. And I guess what the parallel that I'm looking at is, how do we essentially move to override the ruling of the chair? The chair in this instance, I feel like the school board president is functioning in that capacity, not yourself, because that's where the decision is coming from, right? And so I think having a document that essentially does that may be helpful in this instance.
Okay, thanks for those clarifications. And either way, our next joint meeting with the school board is September 18th. So, okay, next we'll pivot on to Aaron Baldwin Day, presentation on school closure and reuse, emerging best practices.
Excuse me. Bless you. All right. So this is 100% born out of the conversation we just had. And my curiosity after going through this process as a legislator from sort of inception to where we are now of a school closure and reuse process, I wanted to understand what is happening other places in the nation and what's working other places in the nation, so that we, as we proceed through what will likely be more such processes, we are not reinventing the wheel. Next slide, please. So why is this our lane? Ultimately, I would argue that school closure is a land use decision, and land use is our purview per charter. Schools are also public assets with real value, and we need to be aware, as the folks who are empowered to hold the purse strings of the municipality, of what those assets really cost us in a variety of ways. And then finally, closure is absolutely a neighborhood loss. So there's a woman in Maryland she's a professor at University of Maryland who has done 15 plus years of research on school closure and reuse. She's done some fascinating things. And this at the top of the slide is a quote from her, which says, "School districts make and unmake neighborhoods, acting as planners through school facilities decisions." And to me, this is the nexus of our role and the role of the municipality versus the school district when it comes to these kinds of choices. So again, this is not just about educational decisions, and this is really about the infrastructure of our neighborhoods. And I believe we have a part to play. And also a part to, I think part of our role is asking whose interests are served when taxpayer funded and maintained assets are repurposed. I think that is a really critical question for us to grapple with, and we will have to deal with that every time a school property comes back into our control. Next slide, please. Just setting the table just a little bit. This is not unique to Anchorage. This is not unique to Alaska. The public education landscape since about 2016 has been changing pretty dramatically. Sort of this negative doom loop of decreased funding for public education, decreased enrollment for public education, round and round we go, plus aging buildings. And the data that's here to the side is from the National Center for Education Statistics. That's a federal department that has put together this chart. What does U.S. public elementary school enrollment look like? Clearly, there's a precipitous drop that happens around the COVID times, but there are other things that are happening as well, including falling birth rates, competition from alternative education models, in some places, out migration. To be clear, not every place is facing this kind of change in elementary school enrollment, but this is the trend line. There are places where people are moving in and school districts are growing, but that is not the story everywhere. So this is projected to continue. The dashed line that you see there is the projection for where we will continue to be and where we will end up in 2030, which is about the same neighborhood as we were in the early 1990s. Or as my children would say, the late 1900s. Next slide, please. This is basically a graphic that illustrates the process that it has been followed with pretty significant success in other localities. And I'm pulling from Philadelphia, a few districts in California, Kansas City. There's a place that has had to do in a massive amount of school closure and repurposing. They had at one point 37 buildings that they were trying to repurpose. And that is not an insignificant lift. So this closure process to do it intentionally begins with a community process that is inclusive. And the yellow bubbles are the places where it seems to me that the assembly has a role to play. So I tried to color code this just a little bit. And orange is where we might have an ancillary role, but certainly not being in the driver's seat. So beginning a community process that actually results in a very clear values-based rubric that the community agrees is the litmus test that we will use when we are considering school closure decisions. Public data and trends have to be a part of that conversation. And these are moving targets, which means that rubrics might need to be updated as we get new information, i.e. multi-billion-dollar recapitalization at an Air Force base, or a military installation, which might change the game in terms of where school closures might occur. And also an impact analysis that is based on equity. What is the difference? What is the fundamental difference and the cost to the municipality and to the school district if we are closing, say, a neighborhood school where a lot of kids are walking or coming in from close proximity to the school building versus closure and repurposing of a school where a lot of kids are being driven in private cars. Those are two different impacts in terms of neighborhood infrastructure. Obviously, the closure decision happens. That is squarely the purview of the school district. There's logistics that must be developed. Ideally, those are being developed as decisions are being considered. The closing schools in places where this is going well are actively supported with all kinds of extra resources. That includes mental health care on site. That includes coaching for the leadership of the school. That includes some very specific kinds of mentoring and navigation for teachers who are going to be looking for another place to be. A lot of these things are prepped in advance. And then the receiving schools also receive a similar level of preparation in places where this is happening really seamlessly. And then there is an opportunity for there to be a very public acknowledgement and affirmation of the importance of the school itself. And I will say that this never happened publicly with Campbell STEM. And I personally view that as a tragedy. That we closed a neighborhood school and there was absolutely no acknowledgement by ASD or by municipal government that decision mattered and that it had a fundamental impact on the neighborhood, not to mention the families who attend that school. So this, in my estimation, was a huge miss. Campbell STEM did it themselves. They put together their own celebration of their school before it shuttered. Astonishing. And then the reuse planning happens, which is where, again, we have a very active role to play. And I will not speak for our counterparts on the administrative side of the house, but I understand that this has not been a smooth process. So this can happen and it can happen well. And I would love for us to come up with ways that it does happen better in the future. With that, I would love to throw some principles out in front of you to say, this is what I think we should be aiming for. One is, next slide, Jamie. Consultation early and often with the people who are closest to the impact. The folks at Campbell STEM were not actually notified as a group that their school was slated for closure. It just appeared as an agenda item on a school district agenda, a school board agenda. Clarity among government entities. That would be us, that would be the mayor's administration, and that would be the ASD school board and the ASD administration. What are our lanes? And can we figure those out in advance? Can we sort this out in a collegial way so that we have better outcomes and we have more trust built with the community because they see that we are working together in an intentional fashion? That is a thing that was a through line in the research, is that when the public perceives that all of these entities are working together in the best interest of the community, they feel a little better and a little less panicked when these big decisions are happening. And then finally, really prioritizing public use, public benefit, or even public ownership when we're talking about reuse of buildings and properties. So those are the principles that I think are really what has come out for me of what other localities, other jurisdictions are doing, and they're doing well. There's a specific set of practices related to school reuse, which I'd like to highlight, and then I will be done. Would you go to the next slide, Jamie? The first is, and this is coming really from the Kansas City and Philadelphia models. There is really defined policy guidance and defined process from us, from the legislative body, that says this is how we intend for these things to look. So how are decisions about school reuse going to be made? Who is going to make them? Is it entirely an administrative function, or is the assembly involved? What reuse possibilities are we open to? Sale, lease, demolition, use types? Like, these are conversations that need to be had, and they need to be had in public. And also, how are we committing to engage the neighborhood, particularly when you have a building like Campbell STEM that is literally embedded in the middle of a community? We're not talking about Lake Otis, which is on an arterial, and the neighborhood is adjacent, but not like right next door. How are we going to engage with these groups of stakeholders? We don't have a plan for that right now. We have no policy guidance on this topic. The second best practice is site tours. People, lawmakers, administrators actually going to look at buildings before soliciting proposals, before actually like thinking through what types of reuse might be the most appropriate, listening to neighborhood desires, giving the neighborhood a forum to express grief and anger. I hosted a public meeting for Campbell STEM precisely for this purpose, to give them an opportunity to publicly say why they were hurt, why they were experiencing grief, to acknowledge the impact of the closure, and then ask them for their thoughts and their feedback about how they would like to see the building repurposed and what's important to them as a community. Because this is an anchor. It is a critical piece of the infrastructure of this community. And then, thirdly, technical assistance. A lot of folks, and we've done a lot of this in-house, but assessments related to the condition of the building, the layout, zoning and land use possibilities. This often includes stakeholder feedback from step 2. What are the potentials for redevelopment, right? And then crafting some very clear RFPs out of those technical assessments. Some of this is in process right now here in the Muni for Campbell STEM and for other ASD properties that are coming back into our purview, to include Abbott Loop Elementary, which is also in Midtown. And then finally, a really participatory evaluation process for the proposals that come back. And this is not something that we generally do, but I think we are talking about a really unique set of circumstances when we're talking about school closure. In Kansas City, there's an internal review of RFPs by a technical team to evaluate whether or not the proposals are even viable. But then there's a public meeting where the proposal teams actually pitch their reuse ideas to the neighborhood. And the neighborhood actually gets to offer feedback, which is not the final decision on what ultimately happens with the building and the parcel, but that feedback is actively incorporated into the final decision, whether it's a sale or a lease or what have you, or set of leases in some cases. And
to involve the community at that level, I don't think is anything that we've ever contemplated. But that is how Kansas City got such significant buy-in from the community to repurpose 37 buildings, 37 school buildings. And interestingly enough, some of those reuses have now been flipped, and the building has been converted back into a school after being leased for a period of time. They've been at this for over a decade. So they know some things, I guess is what I'm saying. And then finally, making sure that our contracts are very clear about public benefit, about clawbacks, with accountability metrics, that any changes come back to us, any use changes come back to us, and potentially also to the community for approval and ratification. But having thought this through in advance, what do we want to be in our contract if we are leasing a school building to a user or a group of users, or if we are selling public land for redevelopment? What are the things that we want to be sure are non-negotiable in our contractual arrangements? I don't know that we've thought this through. So that's, I think, a really ripe conversation to have with the mayor's office and the Department of Law. So this is what I've learned. This is what I put before you as aspirational, as we are likely looking at additional school closures in the future, potentially not in the next year or two, but I would imagine within the next 3 to 4 years, we will see additional elementary schools and potentially even secondary institutions closing here in Anchorage. So I don't want this to be something that we continue to be reactive about. I hope it's something that we can decide we're going to be proactive about. And in being proactive, reassure the community that we've got their back. Questions, comments? Jamie, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, questions, comments from members? Okay, not seeing any. Lots of good food for thought. Okay, we have 40 minutes left. I know we have 2 big items, but I want to also recognize that Zach Christie will be leaving us, I think, probably this week, right? Or tomorrow, yeah. So I want to make sure that we make time for his presentation since he worked hard on it. So we're going to switch to that next, and then and I know we also have Alden in the back. I think we'll do the committee work last, and hopefully we can get through what we need to. So. And then I'm going to also ask folks to just hold questions till the end if you can, unless it's a quick clarifying question. Okay, go ahead, Zach.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Aaron, for that great presentation. I'm starting to figure out that maybe levity in mine was not the best course of action. So cringe quietly to yourselves. That would be much appreciated. We're going to talk about legislative immunity today. And the good news is it's fairly straightforward legal doctrine. The bad news is that we've been arguing about it for about 250 years in this country. So here we go. Every elected official eventually asks some version of these questions. Can I be sued for something that I say during a meeting? Does legislative immunity protect me? And where does that protection begin and end? And perhaps most importantly, does immunity follow me does immunity follow me outside of the assembly chamber? The answer is yes, sometimes. And this presentation is really about figuring out what that sometimes means. So the big picture is that the purpose of legislative immunity is pretty simple. Legislators need to be able to debate, deliberate, investigate, criticize, and vote without worrying about their controversial decisions going into a personal lawsuit. The doctrine protects independent judgment, open debate, legislative decision-making, and ultimately the public interest. And that's an important distinction. Legislative immunity isn't really about protecting the legislator, it's about protecting the legislative process. So bear that in mind as we continue. This is where I want to make an important distinction, though. Sometimes legislators will hear free speech and they'll think, oh, well, I have a First Amendment right to say whatever I want. And the First Amendment is obviously very important. But when you're exercising governmental authority, you aren't simply acting as a private citizen. The legislative power belongs to the people, and it's exercised through this institution of which you are a part of. So a legislator doesn't really acquire a personal First Amendment right to exercise legislative power however they want. It's an important distinction because we're talking about legislative immunity, not a general constitutional right to say whatever you want while you're holding office. I know it might seem unfair, but it's kind of the bedrock of all American jurisprudence, and it depends on it. So no pressure, guys. Constitutional foundation for this is in Article 1, Section 6 of the Federal Speech and Debate Clause, and it only applies to members of Congress, so not you guys. Alaska Constitution does the same thing, but for state legislators, also not relevant to you guys. So what does protect you? And the long and short of it is basically common law and Supreme Court precedent from case law. There's two specific cases that I brought up here today, Tenney versus Brandhove and Bogan v. Scott Harris. In Tenney, it's one of the foundational cases. The Supreme Court recognized that there's an absolute immunity for legislative activities. And I love this quote, to claim of an unworthy purpose does not, spelling error, destroy the privilege. What does that mean? Basically, you don't defeat legislative immunity simply by saying that the legislator had terrible motive. The court's focus is on the legislative function. Similarly, in Bogan, we see that the Supreme Court unanimously held that the local legislators receive absolute legislative immunity for legislative acts. And that's particularly relevant to you guys. Debating, introducing legislation, voting, conducting hearings, those are all core legislative functions of which you guys enjoy legislative immunity. So the functional test. And this is probably the most important slide of the presentation. The question isn't simply, where were you? Were you elected? Did you use your official title? The question is, what function were you performing? That's it. That's the whole game. Is everybody still with me? Buckle in, because there's another 13 slides that basically talk about the same question in different ways. Absolutely.
Yeah, Erin, go ahead. Thank you. So a legislative function being one of the four things that you listed on the previous slide, or other things too?
If I understand the question, I believe it was the first one. Yes. So it gets complicated a little bit. Where does legislative immunity stop? And the honest answer is it depends. It's incredibly, I'm sure that's not incredibly a satisfying answer for somebody who was expecting a flowchart today. But the general principle is that the farther an activity moves away from the legislative process, the weaker the argument for immunity becomes. There are clearly protected legislative functions, of course. So speaking during assembly meetings, committee meetings, work sessions, legislative investigations, public hearings, debate, ordinances and resolutions, et cetera. If you're doing those, you're pretty close to the center of the legislative immunity bullseye. And absolute means absolute. And so for genuinely legislative acts, immunity generally isn't defeated just because someone alleges malice, things like political motivation, retaliation, or even an intentional falsehood. The point is that courts generally don't want to turn legislative debate into a trial about a legislator's subjective motives. Again, they're going to be asking, what were you doing? And that's the main question that they'll be asking. Defamation. If an assembly member makes a statement during legislative debate concerning a matter before the assembly, that statement is generally protected from lawsuits alleging things like libel, slander, defamation. The important question isn't whether it's your opinion, it's whether you are making the statement as part of the protected legislative function. And now we leave the comfortable world of the assembly chamber and we go to outside formal meetings. The law in these outside of these formal meetings, it becomes considerably less certain. There isn't a bright line rule. You're not automatically immune because you're wearing an assembly pin or swag or whatever, but you're also not automatically unprotected because you walked out of the assembly chamber or city hall. Again, what function are you performing? And I have to apologize about the format of this slide. If you have any hate mail, please send it to the office, not my personal address. I lost a lot of sleep over this. So these are activities that are probably protected. You can feel pretty confident about it. Legislative newsletters are a good example. If you're talking or telling constituents about pending ordinances, assembly actions, committee work, and legislative priorities, that's closely connected to your legislative duties. You're covered. Same with meeting privately with constituents, neighborhood groups, industry reps, or subject matter experts to develop legislation. Same thing. That's called legislative fact finding. And the same can apply to emails discussing proposed ordinances, amendments, research, and committee work. The medium doesn't really change the function, if you will. We do have gray areas, though. Community council meetings, maybe. If you're discussing pending legislation and gathering information, that's much more legislative, and you could probably be a little bit easier on that. If you're just engaging in general political advocacy, it gets a little muddled, so be careful there. Social media is probably the biggest one today. Yeah, it's probably the biggest gray area. Was it discussing legislation, constituent outreach, campaign speech, political commentary, something personal? Those distinctions really matter in the fact finding, the fact pattern, excuse me. So I'd be very cautious about telling anybody that simply because putting assembly member in your social media bio, it gives you automatic immunity. It doesn't. There are protected conduct. There is protective conduct. And as the D would say, it's just your opinion, man. This is the forum by which that you can express it. You're totally protected here. Things like votes, sponsorship of legislation, things of that nature. Legislative debate, of course. Conduct that's not protected. I mean, this should be somewhat self-explanatory. Don't accept any bribes. Don't assault anybody. Harassment's bad. Destruction of property. Not covered from legislative immunity, but I have to say it. Practical rule of thumb is, would this activity still exist if I were not exercising legislative authority? That's something you should be asking yourself. Campaigning, networking, fundraising, yes. Posting something regrettable online at 11:47 p.m., unfortunately, yes. But debate legislation, introducing ordinances, voting, no. Those activities only exist because you are exercising legislative authority, and that's why the protection for those is much stronger. So some key takeaways. Legislative immunity exists to protect the legislative process, not necessarily the individual legislator. Municipal legislators are protected through common law and Supreme Court precedent, not through the federal or Alaska Constitution. Courts use the functional analysis test. Debate, voting, sponsorship, and committee work are at the core of this protection. And the further that you move away from actual lawmaking, the more fact-specific the question becomes. So final thoughts, legislative immunity isn't about who you are. It's not about your title, not about where you are. It's not about whether the public is watching. It's about what government function that you're performing. If the activity is integral to the legislative process, the protection is strong. If it isn't, legislative immunity may not apply. So thank you for your kind attention. If today's presentation prevented even one lawsuit, I'd like for you guys to add that into my performance review. If it inspired one, I'd like the record to reflect that I was acting under the advice and supervision of counsel. Thank you.
I'll note there's clapping. And thank you. I'll see if there's questions, comments from members. Erin.
I just want to say top tier use of the Glabowski references. Thank you. That absolutely made my day.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Jared.
Yeah, just also want to say thank you for everything. We had a blast this summer. I'm sure hopefully you did as well. And again, sorry for dunking over you in that one-on-one basketball game.
I remember that. That happened at my Oceanside property in Arizona.
Correct.
I
That's
think.
where I
Yeah,
recall it as well.
that's right.
Yes.
No, I really have enjoyed this job and this internship. So thanks for having me, guys. Really, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And as always, if you have legal questions, please speak to our attorneys if you need advice on specific things. So yeah, and thank you, Mr. Christie. Thank you, Zach, for your work, and best of luck in your next year of law school. So, okay, as I said, we have two big topics. I know we have a half hour left. I guess what I'm going to do, partly because we do have our audit staff here, I want to get into the travel and account spending policies, but I am going to. Well, I guess let me ask now, can folks stay until 3:15? Okay. Okay, I know some can, some can't. I think if we have to, we will push out to that, but not beyond that. And then we might need to pick up well, we're going to pick up one of these topics at our next meeting. We might need to do both. So, okay, so with that, let's start into our travel and account spending policies discussion. And I'll invite our audit folks to come up, but I do have a few slides just to set the stage, and then I'm going to turn it to them to go into, because again, I want to provide some context. I will also note we have the memo that they provided, as well as a letter that I had written attached to it to give some context. I'm not going to read through that letter, and I'm not covering all the same ground in my presentation, but I did want to provide some information up front. And then we'll go to Alden after that. So next slide, please. So this is really about, I just want to be clear, the common understanding that I want to offer for folks today. The kind of scope of this conversation is about expenditures, using our individual spending accounts as members. It's understanding current policies, what's allowed and not allowed. We're going to be discussing, as I said, the results of the work from internal audit and possible changes to our policies and processes. Today, the conversation is not supposed to be about anything regarding staff expenditures or travel. They have their own set of policies. This is about what members do. We're not going to be doing a detailed review of past expenditures or proposing corrective actions on those, because again, this is about the process and really understanding globally what this looks like. And then we're also not doing group wordsmithing of draft policy. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but this is really to have a conversation as a body to give direction and guidance on what we should do with our policies. So next slide, please. And again, I know there's a lot of text up here. I'm not going to read it all aloud, but wanted to document this stuff for you all. So there's two policies that we're talking about. We do have them, a copy of them, as well as an older policy that we can look back because one of them changed recently. But just for the super quick version here. So every member by seat is allocated $24,000 a year as an individual spending account. If you're in a partial term, you get part of that depending on whether you're starting or ending a term. So the same two people that are in the same seat in the course of a year have that same total. It's not 24,000 per person, no matter what. There's a use it or lose it policy. So anything that isn't spent out of those rolls back in the general fund. That is in our policy already. And also members can combine spending or they can basically dedicate part of their funding to branch-wide projects or other expenditures. So one example, a couple years ago, some members pooled some funds that we had left over to buy branded jackets for staff throughout the whole branch. So those are the kind of, I'm trying to use a specific example so it's clear. Members are not spending these funds directly. We don't have P cards. We don't do purchase orders. We don't book our own travel. These are things that are, I suppose there's the reimbursement method, but typically these are spent through staff. And so they do go through an approval process. There's no assembly member that just has a checkbook that's writing it directly. And then the 24,000 number was recently increased in 2020. So I don't have the full history on that, but just to note that the main reason why these funds have been around historically is to hire assembly aides by contract. It's never been enough to hire a full-time person or even a part-time person. It's really a very small amount. But I believe a prior assembly raised this with the idea that it was hard to find folks for such little money to do anything. And so at the time, it was increased, and then the idea being that it was supposed to be used for aid funding, and so there was a limit on travel expenditures back then. So that changed in a recent policy. Next slide, please. So how do people use their ISAs? I think that's a question you have to ask every member, past and former members, or sorry, past and present members. But these are the general categories as far as I can tell. These aren't in code or anything. It's just a general example. So as I said, assembly aides, contracts, they do different things. I listed some examples there based on my experience and what I know other members have done. Communication, some of us have Muni cell phones. That's a contract that comes out of that account. E-newsletter subscription. Some people do print mailers. That kind of general bucket of work is communications to constituents. Travel is one of them. We've talked about them. I'll go into a little bit more about what that looks like. And then other is just anything else. For example, I bought a book on comprehensive planning that I wanted to read myself and also hand over to our community economic development director. I used my ISA funds for that. As I said, there's a broad kind of broad array of things that you could imagine using these funds for a legislative purpose. Next slide. So let's look at the data. And this is a shout out to Molly Roche, our new budget analyst. She provided these two charts. Again, I know they're hard to read. The point is not looking at the individual lines. It's to get a visual snapshot of what we're looking at. So I asked her to de-identify those things. There's notes below. So those do not correspond to our seat. Like I'm seat E. I'm not E up there, or if I am, I don't know that I am. And also 2025 and 2026, the person listed as CE is not the same person. So again, these are de-identified because it's for illustration, and it shows you the breadth of how people use or don't use their spending accounts. And again, this is also for anybody who started or ended their term in 2025, their spending is combined with the person before or after them. So again, it's by seat, it's by account number. And so that really shows you most people do have some kind of aid. They're putting either part or all of their funding to that. Some folks travel, some folks don't. There's communications in there. Some folks are using more of it for that or less. And then there's other, which is again, anything else that didn't fit those other categories. So that's just historical data to show basically the breadth of how people use these. And again, I personally do not know, well, I don't know who is who, but also I don't know what they were spending it on because that's all tracked by staff. So if you want those detailed records, they are available, but that's not the point of talking about it today. Next slide, please. So we'll get through what travel is, and then because I wanted to provide this context before we hear from the auditor. So there's two general categories of member travel, meaning why would somebody be traveling as a assembly member? One is on branch business. So I listed out there, and in some circumstances they can access, we have a limited assembly travel account for members, again, separate from staff. Clerk staff going to a conference is using their own travel budget. This is just member budgets. We are members of National League of Cities, National Association of Counties, Alaska Municipal League. Those three things have regular conferences. They are member organizations. And so at all three of those things, there are votes taken as a member. The municipality is a member, and those typically have to be in person. And so, and then there's also the Alaska Municipal League. Anchorage has a dedicated board seat. We are a founding member for the last 76 years. And so so I am currently serving in that. Felix Rivera was the one before it. Board meetings happen in multiple parts of the state. And they do have a way to connect remotely, but typically the expectation is you show up in person. So those are the kinds of things that are used for branch travel. The others I noted below are, in the past, we've hosted a dinner for legislators, our Anchorage delegation down in Juneau. That would be considered branch travel. And also every 10 years, folks from Anchorage historically have traveled to Chitose, Japan, our sister city. And then the other flip every 10 years. So 2024 was the last time we had a number of folks from that city travel to our city for a visit. And so those are just describing the kinds of things that have happened. And then everything else is using an individual spending account. So I won't read them all out there, but essentially, if you're participating in a committee with one of those organizations, if you are attending other local government convenings, a conference, a professional conference, or other things relevant, or if you go to Juneau and you're advocating for your district or for the muni and it's outside of one of those kind of set things, those are member travel. Next slide. So then I'm going to turn it to the auditor, but I want to put these three questions on the table for discussion. And again, we're going to continue this discussion past this meeting date. One is in our policy. As a policy, what rules and limits should we put on ourselves as members about using our funds for legislative business? And again, we've talked a lot about travel, but all of these things you can come up with situations to say a member should be able to do that or a member shouldn't be able to do that. So generally, I think that's the question, is how much do we want to restrict ourselves and our future selves, as long as this policy exists, on what we should or shouldn't be spending that money on. The second question is the process. How should those be reviewed and approved? There is an approval process. It goes through staff and it goes through the chair. And one specific question I've raised to everybody, how much discretion should the chair have over those decisions? There's a posture that I could take and say, I'm going to deny every single expenditure from every member because I'm angry at you all, right? Like that is a power I have. And I'm not arguing that it should be that way, but that is the way that it's built now. And so it does leave a fair amount of discretion. The practice has been the reverse, to say generally, I'm going to review these things, make sure it follows policy or not, but it is not my job to arbitrate what other members are doing. So those are kind of the two, that's where we are now, but I think that's something to think about, is what discretion should we have? And then that would really be functionally the chair. The third one is reporting. We've talked about both in terms of kind of how spending is happening, in addition to doing public records requests, should that be proactively published? In what detail? Should we require members to do some kind of follow-up report if they do travel? So those kinds of questions, again, as a policy, we need to think about. So those are the ones I want to put on the table. And then what we'll do now is get into the findings from internal audit, looking at that process, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion about that. And again, the goal is not to figure these things out today, but I want some input because if and when we change our policies, which are signed by the chair, I want it to be something that people feel represents the way that we want this body to operate. So with that, I'm going to turn to Alden. And I think if you go to the next slide, it's really just a transition slide. Yes, okay, great.
Transition with nothing.
Yeah.
So I hope to get clapping as lawyers do at the end. Of this year. If auditors are at the same level as lawyers, which doesn't seem to be the case. You are correct. So we were asked to do a special study. A special study is not a full-blown audit where it goes to the AM and goes to the assembly. This special study, however, has become very public, so you all have the summary document that was provided to the assembly chair as well as the legal department. We were asked to just basically look at assembly travel for that period of time that we were asked to look at it, and how did what we have for our records match up to what the policies and procedures were in place at the time that the travel was taken, so that we really focused just on that. I will tell you, for the majority of the findings, that or the information that we provided, all the backup is there. Authorization forms were there, expenditures were there. The clerk's office does all the things. There wasn't anybody doing anything separately or on their own. The key things that we identified, I wouldn't necessarily call them findings. I would call them, because remember, this is a special study, not an audit. Findings normally lead to recommendations. We did not make recommendations, nor did we get a response back on what you're going to do to fix it. That's the real big difference between a special study and an audit. We kind of just looked at it very briefly and said, was everything in the file for these travel things as we would expect that match up to the policies and procedures? So the two areas that have been talked about and I've been asked a lot of questions about, one centers upon the assembly chair or their designee in the new policy is supposed to have basically approved the travel before anything ever goes forward in some kind of hopefully written format. That was very challenging. We asked the clerk's office for that because the assembly chair is no longer the assembly chair. So the access to those emails from the archives that reside in IT were challenging. So I actually wrote that sentence personally in there because I didn't want it to come off and say we only got 1 out of 15 travel authorizations from the chair, and thus they didn't exist. My point is we're not able to validate that they existed because all those email correspondences have been archived. If a more full-blown study was allowed, where was IT able to give Chair Constance email access, we could always go through there. We did try to go to some of the assembly members who got those responses, and we received none of those from those assembly members. So I wanted to, that is a requirement in the current process. We did not get very many of those. We only got 1 that we can validate, but that does not mean all the rest of them don't exist. It's just that we couldn't prove it in the time period that we have. I will say 60 days or in advance of something that's supposed to be 60 days, I think is a challenge. So when you're looking at the timeframes, a lot of these conferences or these conversations of conferences came up certainly in a shorter time period of that, if you're going to Juneau and so forth. So when you put a strict timeline and deadline in there, sometimes it's hard to meet because the conferences aren't aware of in that particular time period. So that one's caused a lot of discussions that I've had. So the point is they may exist. There may be ones that didn't exist. And if that was the case, then the policy was not followed. So you have to be able to look at that. But the internal audit department was not able to validate it with 100% certainty. So I wrote it that way. The other item that was in there talks about almost all of these were done through Alaska Airlines and using the EasyBiz, which is a recommended process and for all municipal travel, not just assembly. The assembly travel follows very similarly to what the municipal travel policy states, and that's how we've looked at it. So all the travel authorization forms were there, the backup, all of those kind of things were included, but what we didn't see or what I didn't see when we were looking at this, is it also states that you must prove that the ticket that you're going to is of the most economical factor. What I would have expected to see and shown in the file was by either an assembly member or somebody else ahead of time when they're asking for this, because your authorization form is ahead of time. It actually hasn't occurred yet. You're asking the clerk's office, please go ahead and do these things. Well, time, airline things go up and down, hotel reservations go up and down. So it's a guesstimate. It's a estimate at that point in time. But I would expect somebody to come forward and say, I've looked at Expedia as an example, and I need to go from here to Seattle, and here's the 4 tickets on the day that I need to go, or 4 airlines that need to go there and back. And as such, this is the cheapest version of that ticket at that point in time. Please go ahead and book that particular ticket. There are a lot of nuances in that. We've talked about that in general settings. Do you have to pay for seats? Do you have to pay for baggage? Do you make the assembly member go the Cordova, Juneau, Ketchikan? I say yes, but that may, versus the direct flight. So you have to be careful when you're crafting your policies that you're going to follow, because what is normal prudence? And I believe a lot of the policies have been built on trust. Your elected assembly people, they're trusting you to do what's best in the case of your dollars that you have authority to. It doesn't make sense to make somebody have to spend an extra overnight at the airport for 7 hours for saving $12 or something to that effect. So where is the decision-making process, and where are the gray areas that can be looked at to be able to do that? However, I do feel strongly that when you're placing a ticket, which is normally the most expensive portion, depending on the length of conference at the hotel, it would be good practice to get into to have some kind of a thing that says, here's what is most economical. If Alaska Airlines is the most economical option, we absolutely want people to use EasyBiz. We want them to use their personal mileage numbers, because the municipality benefits as well, because we get joint mileage that ends up being used for other purposes, which saves the municipality money. So in most cases, yes, if Alaska Airlines, almost all cases, if Alaska Airlines is the cheapest, we would please hope that the people would use that. But I do think there is an obligation to prove that up front, that was the one, because it says it in there, it must be the most economical. And if it's not the most economical, then you engage those conversations. Yeah, but this one makes me have to get to the airport at 3 a.m, and I got 2 layovers, and is $50 worth it? I mean, what is most economical? There is nothing that describes what that is. But in the absence of that, I would hate for something to come up where Delta was, 1/3 of the price of Alaska Airlines, and then it's more obvious that that's the way we should have gone. And we didn't see anything in the file that validated that. So I would think that would be a good practice, or a good thing to at least put in there. Now, all the other paperwork seem to be in there in conjunction. And I know, there are different hotels that are nicer than other hotels. They all still are at the conference. So do you go with a $200 hotel versus a $300 hotel, even though they're conference hotels, because they have different rates? That's a tough call to be able to make. So, or do you go with a non-conference one that happens to be cheaper? Where is the cutoff that you're looking for economical and justifiable versus convenient and makes more, makes sense and so forth. So those were kind of the 2 big areas that I wouldn't call them big areas. Those are 2 areas that we kind of highlighted as the things that we would want to at least have you guys discuss and talk about as you go through the new policy procedure discussion as we go through here. But all the trips were there. The clerk's office has done a fantastic job of having a file and a folder and doing all the work. So no assembly people were out there, charging it themselves and doing, they don't have access to any of those kind of things. And I think you want to keep that distance and that policy going forward. Now, as you go through this and you start making more decisions to maybe kind of alleviate some of your concerns, you have to realize that may put more work and more pressure on the clerk's office. There may be, so you have to balance that with what you're trying to accomplish, with where you're trying to put that. The work needs to happen someplace, and who and where are you going to put that on? You have to make a decision as you go through your policies. I am more than happy to answer any specific questions about what we did here. You know, we did try to do it within the time frame that was requested, which we only had about a month, and we certainly tried to have a document to do that. We did prepare a file and give to the legal department, so they have all of it, but it was really trying to compile and gather all of the travel that happened, take a look at it in accordance with the policies and procedures that were in place at that point in time, and if there were areas where we were unable to validate that certain things were done, we kind of notated them and listed them in the report. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Jared?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I have two questions. One for Eldon, and I'll have some questions for you. So just I wanted you to put a finer point on that. You asked assembly members for documentation supporting their travel where we weren't able to pull it for Chris's, because obviously he's not here and it's archived with IT. And I just want to confirm, only one person cooperated with you?
Well, when cooperative, I think is a tough word. We asked the clerk's office if they could provide, the clerk was working with the IT to pull the prior chair's emails based on keywords. It is very challenging to get email access to accounts that have been closed. There is a process and there's ability, but they also don't just give somebody who's not that person or complete email access to be able to do that. So they had to use keywords, time frames, those kind of things. And then they were able to get back a limited number of emails that met that criteria. Within those limited number of emails, when they went through them, they were able to provide or find us one out of the either 15 or 16 that were in the time period where this was a requirement. It only happened after July, and we only got one back. I do believe we asked, I'm going to look at Scott, we did ask for the clerk to reach out to the people that were going on the travel if they could have the back end of that email confirmation as well to validate it in case we couldn't find or didn't get it in the IT email thing. And we received none of those as well. So during the time period we had to get this done, as well as the people we reached out to, because we do not have access to assembly members' emails.
Yeah.
So through that process, we only were able to receive that one out of the batch that were there. So that goes back to my comment. I can't tell you that they all were done according to policy, but I also can't tell you that maybe they are all done because we asked and we did not receive.
Right. Okay.
I think Jamie wanted to respond to
And
this.
Alden, that was specifically for the email requests to the chair, which was taking place before the TA was being circulated. That was the only thing we were requesting.
Okay. I appreciate that. Eldon.
The approval, the current policy says if you're interested in going on a trip, you need to get assembly chair or their designee approval before you even create the travel authorization form as an option. So it's like, can I go on this travel? The answer is yes or no. If the answer is yes, then the assembly member puts together the request, gives it to the clerk's office and said, I've been given approval, the assembly chair has approved me to go on this. Here's my tentative schedules, flights, hopefully that I'd like to go on, hotels, all those kind of things. Then they take that information, the clerk's office, and they actually do the reservations and prepare the document that ultimately does get signed again by the assembly chair or their designee before the travel happens as the pre-authorization form. So the assembly chair current policy gets 2 bites. 1, yes, you can even go. And 2, when the pre-authorization form is going forward to the clerk's office, yes, I've authorized this. So the assembly chair currently has 2 options in the current policy.
Thank you, Alden. Appreciate it and appreciate the hard work that you and your team did on this. And then my second line of question is for you, Anna. Timeline, you got this memo on the 28th of July. We had a pretty contentious assembly meeting on the 4th of August where some of this might have been germane, but you didn't release this until the 6th of August after that had happened. Can you walk us through why you held it?
Yeah, happy to do that. And before I do that, I'm also going to respond briefly to add some color to what Alden said. I think the one is that this kind of pre-approval, we've already flagged as a weakness in the current policy, so there's an intent to change that. Second, I think it does not say written approval, so I can give two examples. One is last summer I traveled because I'm on an NLC committee. I verbally spoke with the former chair Chris about that trip, and so there's no record of that because it was a conversation and we can't record air. So that's one of them. The second is I have been one of our NLC liaisons. I was not planning to go to DC because it was in the middle of an election cycle. And so I verbally spoke to Chris, and also we talked about kind of who might be the incoming other NLC liaison. He was the second one. And so verbally spoke with Aaron about traveling to DC in my place and basically using my discount code for that. So just to say also, that's not something the auditor will have visibility on because again, verbal conversations are a lot of what actually happened. And then the written approval happened after that. So also just to say that the missing record is not necessarily a violation of the policy. In terms of the timing, and we had a conversation about this last week, I had a meeting, one is the next step was to have a meeting with the auditor, the attorney, the clerk about this document. I got it the day that we had that meeting, the 28th. And basically, I guess two things were happening. One is I wasn't sure at that point if this body was going to vote to open an investigation. And so basically that stack of that particular folder was in that meeting. And the discussion was, should we enter this into the record now, or should we wait and see it? Because if there is an active investigation, all of those records would have gone there and probably that memo still would have just gone to the attorneys first before we even talked about it. That's one answer. The second answer is what we spoke about earlier. These are basically a Venn diagram of discussions. And so I made a calculation basically to say that in order to set this up, I wrote a letter about it. I prepared this presentation. We talked about not what he was going to present, but the time allotted to do all of that on the record for something that wasn't even in our agenda as an item in the first place did not feel like a good use of our time, honestly. And so I did hold on to that document knowing that was going to go however it was going to go. And that we may or may not have had further discussion about it. And that in order for us to have this conversation, we would have also had to set up information and make sure that there's proper context for it, because what we're talking about is a policy and a process improvement. That's what this this special review was for. So I recognize that there is probably frustration that I did sit on it for a few days, but I would also ask members to consider, would that have made the conversation better? Would it have ended the meeting sooner? Would it have made the resolution of that item any easier? I don't think so.
Yeah, and there's a third reason you told me.
The third reason was that I was already concerned about the political nature of the discussion and that this would get further politicized.
Right, so you got a report that says in this report, no other information on who he was meeting or an agenda was provided, specifically related to the Puerto Rico trip, which was a part of the conversation we were having on Tuesday night. And that seems to support at least some of the stuff that we were saying. Hey, there needs to be more investigation. This needs to be looked into. Then internal audit comes back and says, they said they were meeting. We had no documentation of that. And then you sat on that, you held it. There was no requirement that there was a memo. There was no requirement that we have a slide deck presentation. This was germane, in my opinion, to the conversation we're having. And you held it because you didn't want it to get politicized, or you didn't want us to be able to use it in the debate. And that's really, really frustrating to me, Anna, because we had the former chair of this assembly get up in front of the body and screech that we're racist and go after us for our motives and our intents here, while you sat on a memo that raised the exact same questions that we were raising as well, saying there is nothing to support that this is what was going on. That is so frustrating to me that you let us walk into that situation where you had something that would have supported our argument. Now you could agree or disagree to whether you think it supported that or not, but that really wasn't, I don't think that was your choice to make that. It's just, as the chair, I expect you to look out for us. And sitting up there, having our motives and our character and everything, screamed and yelled at, assigning the absolute worst possible motives you could possibly do to trying to shine a light on a municipal process and some concerning areas while you held a memo is just outrageous to me. I am so frustrated and disappointed, Anna. Thank you.
Your concern is noted. I would also say, I guess there's a lot of things that I want to say, but I'm going to say one is the note in this memo is about $96. It's 2 days of per diem. It does not cover most of the other things that were there. Second is, I'm going to reiterate, I did not believe that adding this document without additional context, without a public opportunity to even talk about it and understand what is in it and the nature of it, and the fact that it is talking about our internal travel policy and process review, I did not feel that that was sufficiently germane to the question of whether we open an investigation, because this would have been part of an investigation if that had happened. It was not the cause of the investigation. And lastly, I will say that I do not own every failure of this body. I am happy to own my own failures, and every single thing that I have to do is a judgment call that is taking pretty much most of my waking hours at this point. Not this particular item, but the many other things and things that I'm not talking about here on the public record that are also happening in the branch and in the municipality. And so so your feedback is noted. I appreciate that you are frustrated. And I don't even know what else to say. Thanks. Mr. Boland.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess the one thing I will sort of add to that conversation is that, we all operate by Robert's rules. And part of that does speak to, we're not allowed to question each other's motives in debate. In a public hearing or an appearance request, the public is not held to that same standard. They are free to impugn our motives. They've done that with me, and so just want to make sure we all understand that even though someone may have been a former assembly member, former public servant, held some form of office, when they're speaking as a member of the public, they're speaking as a member of the public. I want to go forward now with this discussion, and I actually have to take off to see a patient. So I'll just add two things that I'm interested in, because I think, Anna, in your presentation, you had put some questions on the table. What do we want to see going forward? Two things I think would be interesting. When I was first elected, there was a cap on the percentage of our ISA that we could spend on travel. And I believe it was $11,500 or something in that realm. That went away. So I think that is something we should explore, is saying, hey, you can't use your entire assembly budget on travel. You can use a portion, not the whole thing. Because as you mentioned in your presentation in 2020, one of the reasons it wasn't increased was to be able to bring on an aide, not just to do, travel. So that's something I'm interested in. I also think something that could be interesting, sort of responding to this special project audit, is perhaps we consider doing away with per diem entirely. As assembly members, we continue to get paid no matter where we are. So I get paid if I'm here in Anchorage. I get paid if I'm in New York City or somewhere else. Who knows? I actually waived my per diem for my last trip, which was the NACTO conference, transportation conference in Minneapolis. And I think that's been something that has raised questions, is, because I think that assembly members, we should be able to, stay a couple days somewhere if that travel works out better. The flights are covered. I think the hotel, the accommodations should really only be covered for the days that are relevant to your business, whether that's a conference or a meeting or whatever the purpose is. But I think the per diem is maybe something that we could, is something that has question. We could maybe make that question go away if we did not have per diem. So those are my two recommendations. And with that, I will see you all later. Thanks.
Thanks. Next, I have Aaron in the queue. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Yara.
I think what the audit calls into question is fundamentally a policy question. And so I don't know that it would have been, I get the frustration, because I got frustrated also during this whole process, about information that was left out. And I would say that that kind of started before, this memo. And so I understand the frustration. But I think it's a policy question. Not so much a question about whether an investigation should go forward. And I think the policy question that it asks is, what kind of documentation is a member required to provide? Is saying, you know, I'm meeting with this dignitary or you know, this mayor or this person, is having that as a part of an agenda enough? Or should they be required to carry some kind of like a calling card, you know, to get a signature on it, or you know, some kind of proof that they met with this person? And so I think it's fundamentally a policy question on how much do we go on trust of you are meeting who you say you're meeting, and how much do we want documentation to back that up? And I don't even know what the current policy is on that. Like, if a assembly member takes a trip to go meet with somebody, what kind of requirement is there that they prove that they met with that person?
I would agree with you, Member Silvers, that the conference registration is normally something that is provided because it's online and you can validate the entire thing. Anything that is outside of that, whether it be before or after the conference, that is outside of those periods, I think if that's going to be allowed, I think the assembly should get out of the gray area and get into more black and white area and say, as such, you must provide some form of assurance that you did meet with those people, or what the topics were that were discussed, or you must say, I met with so-and-so, and here's and give you a little summary like we did in school reports when you went on an assembly, or on a field trip, and then you had to come back and say, what did you learn? And you have to do reports. If you want to limit, if you want gray area, then you all need to accept gray as being okay. If you are going to be more black and white and be held to those standards, then they all need to be written down and the expectations need to be clearly delineated to everybody. But I do think that that is a gray area right now. It is not a requirement that you say, you have the person, the mayor sign, yes, I met with this person after the conference and their attendance was validated. It's based on trust and it's based on the understanding right now. So you will determine how hard you want to make those but I think the time period within the conference, normally you should be able to have a pretty good representation, but I do believe it should be required and included as part of the packet. And then the other aspect, how do you know ahead of time if you're going to meet with those people? Maybe something came up at the conference, and then are you going to extend your trip? And hey, this opportunity came up. Well, what happens then? How do you validate extra hotel rooms, or you change your flight, or how do you so it all can't be known ahead of time either in a lot of these cases, that you can actually put a packet together and have it sitting there. So you have to discuss, how are we going to handle changes that might happen midstream? Or a legislator in Juneau's like, I need you to spend 2 more days here because we're right in the middle and I want you to help me write some stuff. It may not have been known ahead of time. So how do you make changes to things that have already been because that's not going to be, we had, I think 3 or 4 of these were what was approved actually didn't turn out to be what was paid because changes happened during the course, and what was reimbursed was something different than the pre-authorization form. So we actually went to the accounts payable department and said, give us the final version of this, but things do change and you have to have a policy and a procedure of what you're going to do when those things happen.
Okay, thanks. It just, yeah, I mean, I guess I think that this is recommended policy that we're kind of talking about here, but I don't think it's something that was in policy in place already.
There was nothing in place.
And so I think it's a policy discussion that's coming up.
I'm kind of weighing in on my personal thoughts on, as you go through this process, what might be some good things to take into consideration as you have those conversations.
Right. So it's a policy discussion that I think that we still need to have. And I guess I will say that I am working with a couple co-sponsors, Aaron Baldwin Day and Jared Gerker, sorry, on doing a more complete audit on all assembly member spending accounts, not just the travel portion. Basically trying to really get a good handle on this policy discussion and what kind of changes that we would like to see moving forward. And just getting a good handle on, what's happening and what to move forward with. What should we do as far as the policy discussion? Thanks.
Thanks. So I'll note it's 3:12. I'm going to check, is there anybody who's going to do audience participation? Okay. So we're going to have time for that. So I will also note, it's obviously it's after 3 p.m. This discussion is not done. It's going to take a while. And what I'm hearing, because part of this is there's one path that I, the chair, work with the clerk, write policy changes and enact those with no other discussion. That is the process we have right now. That doesn't seem like a good idea. And so I wanted to bring this to everybody. And again, I wanted to bring the conversation beyond just travel, because this and ultimately is how we are spending these individual spending accounts. And there's a bunch of other questions we could raise around social media expenditures, communications expenditures. There's a bunch of other things to deal with Board of Ethics law. And we don't have time to get into those today. So this is something we're going to come back to next month. Again, if you can go to the next slide, Jamie, or the 2 slides after, just 1 minute. I just want to note our next steps because I wrote them in this slide, so that we will be coming back. We might not be at the point that we can have a draft policy at our rules committee based on, we didn't get very far today, but that is the goal. So just to note, that's what we're working on. Definitely want to see other discussion about this. If there's further review, then that will set the timeline further out. And in the meantime, the policies that we have now would still be in place. So that's also the consideration of changes. The other thing I'll note, we did not even get to the committee discussion today. I'm going to look at scheduling a special rules committee meeting on Friday, the 21st, specifically for the purpose of coming back to these committees. We have said for months that we want to make these changes. And because this meeting only happens every month, we need to make space to talk about this. I also need to know what people want to be in terms of leadership on these committees. There's a few holes, and I'm not sure that I have the right folks in the right places already. So that is another discussion that we need to get back to, in addition to proposed changes to our committee schedule and the topics of those committees. So because my intent is to get that done starting in the fall. So we need to make time for that discussion. So look for that soon. And with that, I'm going to turn to our audience participation, recognizing that we're not going to get to pending business from members today. I'll ask that one person to come up, and then we will basically adjourn our meeting at 3:18 to give that person 3 minutes.
All right. Okay, here we go. Jamie Lopez, East Anchorage, formerly Coalition, formerly Homeless. So, yeah, you could cut the tension with a butter knife. Mr. Christie, I appreciate your presentation. I like the cut of your jib, sir. Hopefully you're equally entertained with some of the things I do. So, with that said, Ms. Brawley, I want you to know I appreciate you and what you do. And you're getting paid peanuts. All of you are getting paid peanuts, mostly. And Mr. Goker, I also appreciate what you do, Mr. Hanlon, as well. And somebody exited the room, but I won't go into that. So we were talking about investigations, and I'm going to go into another topic. So anyways, I brought this up in the audit committee meeting recently, where a UAS report just stopped around 2022. We had AO 2023-35 S1 and sort of dovetailed there into including discussions about facial recognition tracking and sort of exotic technologies that are coming down the pipeline. And more or less, instead of there being a UAS report that was supposed to be produced to the Assembly no greater than June 1st every year, it went into an annual surveillance report. And those things just sort of never happened, as far as I can tell. 2023, 2024, 2025, nothing produced, not for UAS sort of stuff or for the facial recognition technologies. And more or less, all the departments within the administration were supposed to produce information on that, and it was supposed to be a public report. And so what you had was Real-Time Crime Center passed last fall, And more or less, Aurora is the vendor which is being used, which implements all of these different businesses or security. Anyways, anybody who wants to link in their camera system into this thing, either for live feed or for any number of days of retention, it pops into this. Well, they use facial recognition tracking, and it basically seems to way to outsource the problem. Then it's being pumped into investigations. And so all of that stuff probably should be documented and reported. It's not, as far as I can tell. So I don't know if anybody wants to look into that thing, but it's out there, and those reports don't seem to have been produced. So aside from that, you didn't get into assembly committees and liaison assignments. And I did look at that thing, and I will say I am very deeply disappointed that the Housing and Homelessness Committee meeting is now turning into the Health and Homelessness Committee meeting. Instead of it being monthly, it's being bi-monthly. And so, as I've said before, there are any number of people in this town that are not being helped. They're being abandoned and forgotten. And most of them don't know what day it is, let alone what time of day it is. And so you're essentially giving them, instead of 12 opportunities to come and speak, assuming they even know that this thing is here, you're reducing it to 6. And it was proposed that it potentially be quarterly. And so I would ask you to please consider what you're doing. People need help. They're not getting it, and things are getting worse out there. I have not touched on the AI issue. Maybe I'll say that for another thing, but there is a tidal wave coming, and I hope you're prepared for it.
Thank you for participating. Is 3:18, our meeting is adjourned.